Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Cybersecurity Insiders webinar, where we will be discussing how to revolutionize your IT operations with the power of automation, fast, smart, and compliant. I'm Holger Schulze, the founder of Cybersecurity Insiders, a community that proudly serves over 600,000 cybersecurity professionals. And I'll be your moderator today. Now, today's webinar is brought to you by Syxsense, and Syxsense streamlines IT and security operations with a platform that automates and orchestrates endpoint and vulnerability management. With Syxsense, enterprises get comprehensive visibility over their infrastructure, real-time alerts, and risk-based vulnerability prioritization to ensure effortless operations and improved security. Now, before we begin, let me share some quick housekeeping items. If you have any questions during the webinar, please use the questions window in your GoToWebinar control panel. We'll collect your questions and then answer them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. Now, additional material about the Syxsense platform is available for download in the handout section. And finally, this webinar is being recorded for your convenience, and we will make the recording available after the event. All right, let's get started. In today's webinar, we will dive into the complexities, right, of manual IT and security processes that too often drain, right, valuable time and resources. And we will learn how to automate these processes, right, to keep organizations secure and running, and reducing the burdens of tedious tasks for IT and security teams, and enabling them to focus right on critical business initiatives. Now, with that said, it is my pleasure to introduce today's expert presenter for our deep dive into IT process automation. Please welcome Graham Brooks. Graham is pre-sales manager at Syxsense. Welcome, Graham. Thank you for presenting today.
Thank you, Holger. Appreciate the opportunity.
Graham, to kick things off, can you tell us more about the key problems that I just touched on that IT and security teams are facing today regarding manual and time-consuming IT processes?
Absolutely. For a little bit of background, I actually started IT work years ago in the help desk. So we're talking phones, we're talking basic break-fix solutions for laptops and desktops, we're talking a lot of printers. We're talking about people being able to do basic job functions supported by myself and the rest of my team. From that experience, I've learned that there's a lot of work that happens in the help desk and just in IT operations more generally that's rote. It's the same request time in and time out. Sometimes those processes are hard to make better simply because of their complexity. And sometimes they're relatively easy to fix, but it's considered too much effort to make an automation that will resolve it dynamically. And so it's left to the help desk to resolve those problems as they come up. I can give you probably 50 or 100 examples, but we're going to focus on just one today as we go through. The underlying issue that all IT organizations need to care about is time. Often, people will think of money as being the underlying issue. Do we have the money to be able to afford this platform? Can we afford to hire a new employee? Those are the sorts of questions that are downstream of time, because if you have your time problems understood correctly, you can often figure out ways to reduce cost, either by having a better optimized process in the help desk, better server management workflows. There's a lot of different ways that you can optimize around time and not have to deal with cost-related questions. And so my thesis statement for today is that we should be using science and simple algebra and arithmetic to determine ways to save time because everything else trickles down from there. With that in mind, I'm going to show you a couple simple formulas. Personally, I haven't done any real math since college, but I think it's important for us to take some time to understand the underlying equations that we use every day to triage how we do work in IT. This first calculation is the bedrock of how a help desk should triage work. It's pretty simple. It's N times T equals Y, where N is the number of specific requests that come in per month. T is the time to resolve one of those specific requests, and Y is the amount of time used to resolve that type of request per month. So N times T equals Y. An example of this is a request that you see 20 times, and that request takes 5 minutes to fix per request. If you want to think of it in an example, it could be a printer. Someone calls up, they're having issues with their printer, and you pick up the phone. When that phone gets picked up, you start your clock. You help them, maybe you remote into their computer, you change some settings, the printer starts working, you stop the clock. If you have to pick up your phone 20 times in a month, and it takes about 5 minutes per request, you're looking at 100 minutes per month, which equals to 20 hours per year. That 5-minute request now has escalated to 20 hours a year, which isn't a huge amount of time, to be sure, but if you have multiple help desk members who are all getting those kinds of requests, it can really escalate. And if you have 30 or 40 requests that are simple to resolve, then you're looking at a very large number of hours spent on these sorts of manual rote management tasks. So the brief aside here, I think printers are one of the most frustrating things to support in IT because they're always complex even though they shouldn't be. And I would love it if the world could just move away from the standard printer stack, but that's a problem for another conversation. Now, there's a second calculation that's critical to establish whether or not our printer scenario can be resolved. It's the mean time to automate. And you'll note that in this calculation, we're using addition instead of multiplication. In our last example, it was the number of requests times the amount of time it takes per request to equate to the total amount of time spent solving those sorts of issues. Here, we're looking at the time to research the solution plus the time to build the solution equals the time to automate. And this is a rough estimate. This isn't intended to be a hard rule, but if the time to automate is less than or equal to the amount of time it takes to solve the problem 5 times, then you should probably try automating the issue instead of just manually resolving it. Because over time, you're going to realize that instead of fixing this problem every day, I could have simply automated it 5, 10, 15 days ago and not had to deal with this issue moving forward. But as everyone who works in IT knows, if you can't estimate the time to research and the time to build correctly, and you end up spending 12, 15 hours on an automation project for a simple problem, no one is happy and you've only exacerbated your issues. You haven't actually fixed anything. So being able to accurately assess your time to research and your time to build is critical in order to make this time to automate work.
Graham, can I ask you a quick question on that? The calculation, right, for the time to automate an issue, is it always better to automate if, let's say, that it takes less than 5 times the amount of time it would take to fix things manually? How did you come to that ratio?
Right, right. Well, it's going to depend on your error bars for your organization. Some organizations that are strapped for time, you are working your way out of a deficit. You have 3 help desk staff or 3 IT admins when really you need 4 or 5. If that's true, you might actually need to expand that. Maybe instead of 5 times, it's 10 times or 15 times, because you can only hit the really low hanging fruit. You don't have the ability to just automate everything right now. You have to pick and choose your battles. If on the flip side, you're working in an organization where you are either at or below your current capacity, then maybe we can make that ratio smaller and say if the time to automate is only 3 times or 2 times, then we're still going to do the work, because we know that if we got our research time or our build time wrong, it's not going to be that big of a deal, because it's not going to impact our bottom line, our total aggregate amount of time available in our team. Great question. Moving forward, I want to walk through how Syxsense is going to help break this equation in a positive way. And we're going to use a little bit of formal logic to get there. So if the time to research the solution, the automation, is tiny, so it approaches 0, and if the time to build that automation is also small, then the time to automate is going to be small. So the summation of research and application is small, then your total automation time is small. This is really basic math here. If that is true, then therefore the efficacy of automation increases dramatically. So if you don't have to spend a lot of time researching and building automation, then the application, when, where, and how, and why do I apply automation, should be pretty generic. In most cases, it's better to apply, because I'm not going to have to budget substantial time to fix problems, because I can simply automate it away. And the other reality is, if you can dramatically increase the amount of automation you're using to solve these problems, well, then your overall IT hours spent on rote tasks can be dramatically decreased. The goal is that rather than having to manage against a standard set of problems that you experience daily or weekly, you can instead manage against exceptions. Your help desk team is smart. They might be at the beginning of their careers, but they have a lot of skills that they are willing, ready, and excited to use. And if you can put them to work on harder problems because the phones aren't constantly ringing, that helps retention. That allows your end users to be happier, because they don't have stupid requests that they have to call in about all the time. And it also allows your team more of a breath between each call. They can sit there, they can correctly take note of the tickets that they've been working on, and your entire process will benefit from that time.
Hey, Graham, I'm curious, what are some of the best stories, maybe success stories that you have from, customers implementing Syxsense Cortex and utilizing that methodology you just outlined?
Great question. I have a company that came to us about a year and a half ago, and they were struggling with patch compliance for their servers. They worked in a heavily regulated industry within healthcare, and they had access to a lot of personal identifying information that they needed to keep secure and handle with the utmost level of privacy. To that end, they needed to maintain a very aggressive patching policy in their server environment. but they also had a limited number of staff who could do that work. And they didn't have good process control over it. So frankly, it ended up being one person who would go to each server through a remote desktop session, manually patching it, manually restarting it, ensuring that their software was running correctly on those servers after they patched it, which is fine if you have 5, 10, 15 servers you're managing. It doesn't work when you have 120. That was their scenario. They ended up spending countless hours a month simply patching servers. Once they were able to implement an automation approach to patching using Syxsense, they were able to cut the amount of time they spent on patching down by over 10 times. Massive reduction in hours spent on a simple patch management task because they took the same approach every time. It was always the same types of patches, always the same sort of work. So performing automation against that problem, it's not difficult. It's just a matter of trust and being able to understand where, when, and how to deploy that effort. Great question. Thank you. So how does Syxsense deliver on the promise? How are we going to assist you with building a better automation, a better methodology around these tasks? For us, it comes in the form of Syxsense Cortex. It's a drag and drop, no code by default, low code if you need it, solution for any IT task you can imagine. Essentially, if you can think of the issue, you can probably create a remediation through Cortex to fix the problem that you're experiencing.
Now, Graham, quick question on that. How long would it take the average, IT team to transition their, existing automations over to Syxsense?
Yeah, great question. So it's a cool looking platform, right? Being able to see everything visually. But if you've got 50 or 100 PowerShell scripts that your team has already built, it might not seem quite as exciting to have to rebuild all of that within our framework. Thankfully, we do support inline PowerShell as well as C#, Bash, and a couple other languages. So if you have things that you've already built, you're not starting over. You can simply put your existing work inside of our framework to accomplish everything you're already doing today.
Thank you, Graham. Now, when is automation not a good idea?
Great question. When you're managing by exception, and you'll know that you're managing by exception when you review the tickets that are coming in. If the tickets that you're getting into your operations center or your help desk are novel, it's a new problem you haven't seen before, it's maybe a driver that malfunctioned for the first time, or someone's DNS settings got messed up because of a change in how they were doing their job. Those are novel issues that are going to take someone's skill set to diagnose and then fix. They're not the same thing that you've seen 15 times. Whenever you run into those more novel issues, it's not usually appropriate to perform some sort of automation. But this is where having a effective ticketing system is critical, because you might only get one of those requests this week, but perhaps you start seeing that same driver issue pop up more and more. It could be that you've established a new standard for your hardware and you only saw the issue once because only one person at that point in time had that new device. 3 months down the line, it's now more mainstream. Now I've got 15, 20 users with the same hardware, and now I'm seeing 4 or 5 of the same requests come in. What might be novel and a one-off issue today might end up being actually a more standard issue further down the line, but you'll only be able to know that through an effective ticketing system, which is also downstream of time. the more time that your help desk has, because they're automating more issues, the more time they have to effectively write tickets to describe the work that they're doing. A classic problem we see in the help desk and just IT operations at large is when your people are overworked, they're worse at documentation. And when they're worse at documentation, the more overworked they will be. With that in mind, let's walk over to the Syxsense console, and I will show you what it would look like to perform an IT automation task. So here we're looking at the Syxsense console. This is the home screen of our platform, and we can see a dashboard here showing a couple features. First, we have a map on the left-hand side of our screen. This shows me where all of my assets are physically located in space. And then on the right-hand side, I can see their current patch, configuration, and trust status. With that information, I can determine which environments might be healthy, which environments might be unhealthy, areas of specific interest that I need to take action on. That's all well and good, and we'll probably have other sessions in the future where we get into more specifics around patching and compliance. But for today, we're going to focus in specifically on automating some of those standard rote tasks. And to do that, we're going to take a look at Cortex. I'm going to build a new, very simple workflow that's going to evaluate a device to see if it has a printer and if that printer is in a healthy state or unhealthy state. And we'll do that by looking at the spooler service. So the first thing I'm going to do is provide some advanced actions to the console, and then I'm going to type in service. If I have the print spooler running, then we'll consider this device healthy. So I just type in spooler here and hit save. If spooler is in a started state, it's good to go. Nothing needs to happen. If the spooler is unable to start or it's not currently running, then it's going to be in a failed state. And if it's in a failed state, we need to take some sort of action. And there's a lot of things that we could do. We might try stopping the sprint spooler. We might try reinstalling the printer drivers. There's a lot of different approaches we could take, but for simplicity, I'm going to give a very basic example where we restart the spooler. So here, I'm going to tell it to stop services. So I'm dragging over that action. I'm going to say spooler and then save. Now, after we have established that the spooler is stopped, we are then going to simply restart the print spooler. And so here, I'm just going to put in spooler again and hit save. There's one more thing that I need. I've talked about this extensively today, the importance of having effective ticketing, being able to keep track of documentation of work that's been done and trends that you're seeing in your environment. That's also something you can automate. It doesn't have to be manually performed by the staff. So here, I'm going to tell this workflow to submit a ticket if the device is in a broken state. So if it fails to stop or it fails to start, we're going to send a notice out stating that this device is in a failed state. So I'm just going to put this as an email to our ticketing inbox, and I'm going to have it look to the device name. So we're going to have a wildcard that gets sent out with the name of the device in the subject line. It's going to say open ticket printer stopped. So here we have now a ticket that gets opened if there's a device in a failed state. And with that, we have a super simple but very effective workflow. And this is something that I can run on a recurring basis. I'm going to show you what it would look like in just a moment. Let me name it, and then we'll deploy it. So here we're going to call it printer status eval. I'm going to hit save and close here. And then I'm going to create a real-time compliance around this. So we're going to type in printer here, and then we're going to look and see if we can find devices that might be missing a print spooler service, and if they are, we will enforce it on those devices. So opening up my print status eval, publish this as a policy, so reoccurring. I'm going to tell it to run on a daily basis. We're going to tell it to run every 5 minutes. And here I'm going to target some devices, and I'm going to choose some endpoints that I have online right now. And what we'll see is that this device that I targeted is going to have this workflow run on it every few minutes, just making sure that the device is safe, that it has its printer working correctly. If it's not, it's going to stop and restart that service and send an email to my inbox if it's unable to start the service. And so with that, we've taken a process that might take 5 minutes to fix. You remote into the device, you open the services panel, you stop and restart the print spooler, and you move on. And now this is a process that runs every minute on the background of the device. So if a user changes their network, they reboot their computer, they update drivers or something, and their print spooler stops working, it just needs to be refreshed, it happens dynamically in the background. It doesn't take up significant amount of resources to do so, but we just get to see the effort take place without us having to perform any actions at all. And in doing so, instead of us spending a lot of effort on the research and building of our automation, we've essentially eliminated at least one of those parts of the equation. We're no longer spending any time building the automation, because this took maybe 5 minutes max to build. And so all that we have to do is understand the problem itself, which you can get by having effective ticketing, which can also dovetail into our system as well, since we'll be collecting effective logs about which devices are having what kinds of issues. And I hope that gives you a useful overview of why it's important to use automation as part of your IT management process, especially for the little things, because you'd be surprised at how often those little things come up in your environment. With that, I'm going to hand it back over to Holger for some Q&A time.
Excellent. Thank you, Graham. And this looks awesome. I love the ease of use, like how intuitively, you can put together those process steps. It's impressive. Thank you for sharing this with us. Now, let's take a look at some of the audience questions. But before we dive in, just a quick note to our audience. We would like to hear, what's on your mind. So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask us, please type them into the questions window on your GoToWebinar control panel. And of course, this is your chance to really tap into the expertise, right, we have here with Graham today. Now, let's take a look. Okay, first question. Graham, we talked a lot about the reduction in time, right, to create automations. But how long does it take to learn Syxsense and to migrate existing automations over to the platform? Graham?
Great question. It does depend on the complexity of the work that you're trying to accomplish and your existing skill set. For me, I have a reasonable level of experience in IT automation coming in. I built a lot of tools using Python and Bash. I had some experience with Ansible and with Chef, so I wasn't starting from zero. But if I were, it probably wouldn't have changed very much, because when I and my team help onboard IT organizations into our platform, we see even beginners, people who have been working as help desk technicians for a couple of months, they're able to understand and utilize our automation engine after just 30 minutes. It is not complex. The work that you can accomplish is highly complex, but the underlying architecture is easy. And that's the primary differentiator between what we provide with Cortex and what you're probably experiencing today using a combination of tools like SCCM and PowerShell and Ansible. They're all great platforms and they're very powerful, but the learning curve is substantially higher than a tool like Cortex.
Thank you, Graham. Very impressive. The next question, what industries do you find are benefiting the most from your automation solution?
Yeah, great question. Um, Anyone who has more problems than they have people. Um, I will say that we've had a lot of success in manufacturing. We've had a lot of success in healthcare and in finance. There's many other organizations outside of those particular industries that Syxsense supports, but those are industries that we have found tend to minimize their IT organizations to the bare bones. And we try to allow those admins to perform as if they were fully staffed because they're able to implement so much automation around their process controls. And it's been amazing watching some of our customers take a really hard situation with limited staff, limited financing, and turn it into an effective portfolio of cybersecurity, IT automation, reporting, compliance, everything you could need and expect to have from an IT organization, all provided from just one platform.
Very good, thank you. The next question is, how scalable is Syxsense Cortex? Is it something that can grow as my company expands?
Yeah, I have worked with personally, and my sysadmins have worked with organizations that have 12 staff. I've also worked alongside organizations that have 15,000 staff. Our platform is built around the simple philosophy that complex problems do not necessarily need complex solutions. Because we're able to do that, because we're able to implement simple solutions for complex problems, our platform is infinitely scalable.
Oh, very impressive. So that actually, it's not a question coming from our audience. It's one that popped into my head listening to you. What would you say is the coolest automation someone has built using Syxsense, Cortex, and the kind that makes you go, wow?
Yeah, I have a specific example in mind. We've talked a lot about automation, which is great, but there's one layer deeper that's really the core of most IT. It's orchestration. I'm not so much concerned about being able to patch a server or ensure a print spooler is working on a device. I'm more interested in knowing whether the overarching story of my environment is healthy or not. I need to know that if I patch my domain controller in the UK, that it's not going to break DNS for people in the United States. There's a lot more to IT than just automation. I have a company that I've worked with directly who's trying to create a better process for patching a complex cluster of servers in AWS that were providing website services to their customers. They had about 50 endpoints that were part of this data cluster, and they needed to be updated and managed in a particular sequence. When one device would go down, another device would go up. Data would be moved between assets in this cluster so that there was continuity of access for their end users. It was a highly complex process. But because they're using Syxsense, they're able to break that complex process down into small, bite-sized pieces that describe each step of the process, and then combine each of those small bite-sized pieces into orchestration that allowed them to facilitate the end goal, which was continuity for the end user. No one ever saw downtime in their environment. It was beautiful, it was effective, it worked really well, and it came down to small bite-sized pieces, simple but easy to iterate.
Perfect. That's almost a great closing statement, but we have a couple of questions coming in where people are asking where they can go to learn more about Syxsense and about your automation solution. So what's the best next step for everybody?
Yeah, right in the middle of your screen, it says scan me. That's going to put you onto our website. There's a form there for you to fill out so that you can talk directly to myself or one of the other members of our IT staff, and we'll walk through your scenario, learn more about what you're trying to automate, the problems you're trying to fix, and we'll build out a solution with you so that you could see a different way of approaching the problems that you're handling today.
Beautiful. Thank you. Graham, thank you so much for sharing your insights on IT process automation today. This was fascinating. Thank you.
Absolutely. Appreciate the time.
Now, with that, we reached the finish line of today's session, and we navigated through some interesting IT automation challenges and your solution today, the Syxsense solution. And I hope we provided a good level of clarity and actionable guidance for everybody. And just a quick note, if we couldn't get to all of your questions today, don't worry. We'll be following up with everybody in our audience to answer those questions over the next few days. And so please keep an eye out for a follow-up email that will also include a link to the webinar recording. In closing, thank you all again for joining us today. It's been a pleasure hosting this conversation. Thank you again, Graham, and sincerely hope everybody found this webinar just as interesting and as informative as I did. My name is Holger Scholze, and you've been listening to a Cybersecurity Insiders webinar. I look forward to welcoming all of you again at one of our future webinars. And until then, take care and have a great day.